Hey folks, Randy Newberg here with another episode of Leupold's Hunt Talk Radio. Today I've got a return guest, good friend of mine, Damon Bungard. He's really opened my eyes the last couple years about the use of dogs, not in the traditional hunting sense, but in the sense of using them for the ethical recovery of animals. And I know a lot of us, if at least for me, speaking for myself, when I ever thought about the use of dogs in big game hunting, it just kind of had this negative feeling to me. And I don't know if that was cultural. I don't know if that was peer pressure. I don't know what it is, but watching people use these recovery dogs, I'll call them, has really opened my eyes. And since we've started on YouTube, in 2016, people all over the world are watching our stuff. And we have 2 episodes out there. One, I did not recover a bear. One, I just barely grazed an elk and did not recover that. Both of those, I punched my tag and said, you know what, I'm done with my hunt. All of the Europeans who watched those episodes got a hold of me, not all of them, but all of the comments I got, let's put it that way, from Europeans, ask the question, why aren't you using recovery dogs? We're not even allowed to hunt without recovery dogs. What's going on over there in the States? So in this episode, I'm going to have Damon on here because in the last few years, Damon has really gotten into this. And most of you know Damon through Orion coolers. You remember some of the past podcasts where Damon is what do you call a snake guy? Herpetologist, anyhow, whatever it is, that guy's crazy about snakes. He volunteers for all these crazy snake conservation catching projects, and man, I see him out there with those snakes. I'm like, dude, you're not right. But this one here, I think when you listen to this, you're really going to get a feel for how these kind of dogs and how this growing trend in the United States is nothing but a benefit for hunting and hunters. And hopefully, if this is not allowed in your state, when you listen to Damon and how these dogs are so useful, how they're on leash, how in a lot of states you're not even allowed to carry a firearm, that there's all kinds of rules that have been set in place to make sure that the use of these dogs is strictly for the purpose of recovering game. And hopefully when you listen to that and hear his perspective, it opens your eyes about what amazing possibilities there could be for this. And hopefully we get a chance to touch on the organizations that are out there that are helping bring this forward. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But before we do that, I want to thank the great folks at Leupold for making this podcast possible. LeupoldOptics.com. I'm actually in Portland today. I'd say 20 minutes after I get off this podcast with Damon, I'm heading out to Beaverton, spend the afternoon with Leupold, check out all the new stuff, give them my input and thoughts, and see what more I can be doing to help tell the world how great a supporter Leupold is for hunting and shooting and conservation and access and public lands and all that stuff. So go to leupold.com and check out their great stuff. Onyx Maps, boy, they hardly need an introduction. Now that we've got some tags in our pocket, we are spending a ton of time on our Onyx systems, doing our e-scouting, doing our research, all the things that the Onyx system is absolutely critical to our success. Go to onyxmaps.com and use promo code RANDY, and when you do, they're going to give you 20% off all of their app products. And we're just about getting to the end of application season. We still have Nevada, still have Idaho, let's see, and we've got some of the leftover options coming, second choice option, over-the-counter options coming ahead of us. But you've heard us talk about, you've seen our videos, you've heard the bonus podcasts. All of that has been brought to you by Go Hunt. Go Hunt wants you, just like I do, we want you to go hunting every year. And the whole idea is to make information available to you so you can be your own hunting consultant. That's what I say. Be your own hunting consultant. We hunt on our own. We do all this other stuff on our own. Be your own consultant. No group has brought together the information, the strategy articles, the insight, all of the stuff like Go Hunt has. And when you sign up for their insider, use promo code Randy, and they're going to give you $50 of mad money in their gear shop. Yeah, $50 of free cash to go spend in a serious backcountry gear shop. And then last, I thought it would be good to use this as the introduction because I'm going to click the button on the wire here, and Damon is going to be the guest on this podcast. Damon is the man. I'm not sure what title. He has about 20 jobs that he does at Orion Coolers. And they're launching a new product called Orion Kennels, dog kennels, part of an offshoot of kayaks or roto-molded. The roto-molding process used for kayaks is very similar to what you do for coolers, and that's how they got into the cooler business, because Jackson Kayaks is the parent company. So we've been using Orion coolers since they came on the market. And now Damon, with his engineering background, his crazy outdoor perspectives of doing so many trips, engaging in so many different types of hunting and fishing, Damon is leading their charge also to get into the dog kennel market. So here's what you get. When you go to OrionCoolers.com or OrionKennels.com and you use promo code Randy, you're going to save 20%. So there you have it, folks. Hopefully we've made it worthwhile to listen to this podcast. And in a second, I'm going to click the button, and Damon and I are going to have a long discussion about tracking dogs. Hold on. Here we go. Thanks for being here. Well, folks, I told you that this is going to be an interesting conversation. It's probably going to raise some eyebrows, and I hope it does, because we have a return guest, Damon Bungard from Orion Coolers. You've heard him before. You've got to hear a bunch of his on-your-own, do-it-yourself type adventure hunts that he does. And for the last couple of years, I've been following him on a really interesting thing. And there's one, it's my personal interest about working dogs, but also I get a lot of comments from people in Europe about why don't we use recovery dogs in the United States? And Damon is the guy. Welcome, Damon.
I don't know if I'm the guy, but I'm a guy. I'm a guy with a beard and a dog with a beard.
Well, Jaeger, what kind of dog is he? He's this little thing, but I watch all your YouTube and all your Instagram stuff. What is he?
So yeah, he's what's called a tekel, and a tekel in North America means a working wire hair dachshund from Europe.
Okay.
If you go to Europe and you hear the term tekel, it can kind of mean any dachshund, long hair, short hair, wire hair. But tekels in North America has come to specifically mean working wire hair dachshunds.
Okay.
And working meaning, dachshunds were bred to be above and below ground hunters. So they were bred and have been used for hundreds of years in Europe as big game recovery dogs.
No way.
And so they're great as tracking, but they're also used underground, so for fox, badger, and they're literally bred to go in the hole and dig the animal out, or hold it until the hunter comes and recovers them and digs them out. Like you can find.
So when I see the wiener dog at the CPA office, as we call them, that's really a hunting dog, not a wiener dog.
Yeah, we've kind of Americanized them to a degree with a little too long of backs and too short of legs and big of chests. And that's kind of where the strict breeding requirements on tekels come from. So like Jaeger is registered with the Deutscher Tekel Club. And to even be bred as a tekel, like his breeder is here, Vom Mountain Creek near Atlanta, but he flies the female to Germany to be studded and brought back. And to be qualified as a stud, he has to pass a tracking field trial, gun shyness test, water retrieve. He does do water retrieves.
I've seen him swimming.
He's like a little otter. And then a confirmation test before he can, and they have to be a year and a half old before they can take those tests. But he's like, people have heard me talk about kayaking and stuff and doing things with dogs. I've done some waterfowl work with dogs. I like smaller dogs in my boat. I think probably I've had labs and they just get awkward in a kayak, but like a Boykin Spaniel and down is a great size. And often in a kayak, and I'll recover my own ducks. But I don't have a nose. Nobody has a nose a dog has for finding those wounded ducks or ducks that dive or ducks that burrow and hide. So I was kind of researching, and I'm mostly a big game guy. So I really wanted a dog that I could use in my style of hunting, but that was a little more than a lap dog. And that's where I found Teckles, and they're cool little dogs. They're the real deal.
Well, it's interesting that here in the States, big game recovery dogs are almost, I'm going to say taboo. Maybe they're not. You're engaged in it, so you know more about it than I do. But from the outside looking in, there seems to be this stigma attached to using a dog to recover hit or wounded big game. And I'm in my head, I'm trying to figure out, well, why is that? Because one time I lost a bear that I'm sure expired. I followed him through Alaska forever and never did recover him. Another time I hit an elk that I think was a superficial wound, but still it would have been nice to have a tracking dog that could have helped me lead to wherever that trail ended, or if the elk had already, he's went 10 miles, well, guess what? He's going to make it.
Yeah, totally.
So
it is quite interesting. And, in Europe, that culture is very much, most places you often have to hunt with a guide, with a Jägermeister, and then they have to, by law, in many places, have a dog for recovery. It's like, European hunting culture, number one rule is ethical shot. And number two is you recover what you shoot. And they place a huge priority on that. And the culture in the U.S. definitely has never. It's kind of not. We're lagging behind. I could say.
Because it cracks me up that there are some places that in order to waterfowl hunt, you must have a retriever, because it's very well understood that if you hit a duck, there's a lot of ducks you're not going to recover without a retriever. So why would that be any different than saying, all right, I'm going to have my tracking dog on a leash, and if we hit something, we're going to go find it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it here in the States was, culturally early, there were a lot of places where you could run big game with dogs, particularly in the South, like running deer with dogs.
Okay.
And pushing them. And dogs were getting loose. People weren't obeying property lines. A dog running a deer goes where the deer goes. He doesn't know where somebody's property line starts and ends.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of our early hunting laws and regs were written to stop that. Early on.
Okay.
And then I think as we started, trying to bring recovery dogs to use in the States, there was a lot of legislation down pressure that already existed that had to be overcome.
Okay.
Where I first kind of met Teckles or Dachshunds as working dogs was at the Yankee Sportsman's Classic, which is in Vermont, where we used to live with Ashley, and it's a big hunting outdoor show in Essex, Vermont, at the fairgrounds. And it's like any other, other consumer hunting events. But there was somebody there with a booth with recovery dachshunds, and it was from Deer Search in New York was the organization. And I was like, well, how cool is that? Using little dogs and Teckles and dachshunds are great because they're bred to be independent hunters, and dachshunds are notoriously bold and stubborn.
Yeah.
But they're bred because they're bred to work off lead. They're bred to figure things out on their own. They're bred to figure out where an animal went and go get it. And they have that natural instinct and stubbornness, and they have the ability to lock on to a scent and stay focused on it and not get distracted by other game or other things. That makes them really bad at obedience. They don't sit and stay and listen. Once their nose turns on, their ears turn off for sure.
Really?
Oh yeah. But those traits make them really good at focusing on a particular animal's scent. And most people, they always hear the term blood tracking, but the reality is they're tracking there's a scent gland in every ungulate's hoof.
Between the hooves.
Between the hooves. And they can distinguish that deer by that scent. And so they're so good because they can track with no blood. They track by footprint. It's the interdigital gland or interstitial gland or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
So that aspect of them, is kind of I started learning about there, and that was, I don't know, mid-2000s, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And so I started kind of digging into them then and researching. And yeah, sure enough, after now, he was young and in training last year, just a puppy, but I tried to just take him all over. I took him all over the country with me and tried to introduce a bunch of scents. You got to smell antelope, mule deer, white-tailed deer, boar. And then this year was the first year we kind of started taking calls from strangers. And that service was through a group called United Blood Trackers. So the folks who started Deer Search up in New York, they were kind of the first ones, kind of back where we were at the legislation side of things. They were the first ones to really change state law in New York and then New Hampshire and kind of some New England states regarding using leashed tracking dogs for big game recovery.
Leashed. In other words, they're on a leash.
Correct. Have to be on lead. And I think it was the on lead factor that ultimately let legislation start to be passed in, state level and then make it through and then change, hunting regulations was the fact that dogs weren't running loose anymore. And that perception of dogs running loose, wild, getting hurt or running across property lines goes away once that dog's restrained in some way. And that's also where Teckles are great, is because when they're on lead, it's not like a bloodhound that's weighs 80 pounds and is going to drag you up a mountain. They're 23 pounds of fury. I mean, but you can pick them up. You can deal with stuff and obstacles really well with a smaller dog. That can work through dense brush, because wounded stuff often goes into the densest stuff it can find.
Yeah.
But I think it was that leashed factor that really changed things. And so now if you go to the United Blood Trackers website, there's a map of the states. You can click on each state and see the regs by state. And they do vary. Most require leashed tracking dogs. There are still some states that do not, particularly in the South. Alabama, Texas come to mind.
Is that just because of how thick the vegetation is?
I think in a lot of those states, one, it's still legal to run dogs in deer in some places. I don't know how that is now, but culturally it had been for a lot longer than it was in New England, let's say. But also I think it's just the nature of it. Deer there are often used to bay. Bigger dogs are used, and they can deal with the terrain, the vegetation, snakes better, but they can also big enough to bay up a wounded deer and hold it. That's kind of...
So the website is United Blood Trackers?
Yes.
I'm trying to pull it up here as we're talking.
UnitedBloodTrackers.org, I believe.
Blood Tracker. Oh, there it is. Huh.
And so, you can search by state to find out the regs, but there's also a find a tracker function where you can put in your zip code or area code or city, and you can find registered trackers near you.
Look at that. Find a tracker. Oh, how cool is that?
I think, we've both been fortunate enough in our lives to be hunting for a very long time. It's something you never want to experience, but I think it's something that anybody who hunts for a long time will eventually experience, and that's losing something that you know you hit.
Right.
And it's a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel a little helpless. And like you said, you can track it for a ways, you can make assumptions, but having a dog that's trained and bred and specializes in this, one, gives you the peace of mind of knowing if the animal made it or not, or making a more educated judgment, but also just doing everything within your resources and within your power to find that animal.
Yeah. So looking at this map, some of it is green, some of it is red.
Yeah.
It looks like the green states must be the ones that allow.
Correct.
Okay. And then there's some red ones that do not allow. So my home state of Montana allows blood tracking dogs, but when I
click on Montana, and you'll see the regs that come up for your state.
Okay, yeah. And then
is Montana a leashed state when you pull it up? Does it?
Let me see. Oh, I was in the find a tracker thing. Oh, sorry. So there are 2 people in Montana who are trackers. Let's see. I'm doing this on my phone while we're here, so it doesn't tell me what the rule is, but anyhow, it's cool to know. So it is unitedbloodtrackers.org.
Yes.
So, okay. Man, this is cool stuff.
Not only that, and that's under resources, you can do state regulations. I'll pull up Montana on my end, click with the computer. On April 2011 is when Montana Senate bill passed, allowing the use of dogs to track wounded game and carrying of firearms during such tracking. That's one reg that can change very much by state, is whether or not you're allowed to be armed while on a track. Some states do not allow you to carry a weapon. Tennessee being one of them. The only exception to that is if you have a concealed carry permit. So a person has to have a valid hunting license. They have to do it during the open season for that animal. It has to be leashed with at least a maximum 50-foot lead in Montana. Have to wear hunter orange.
Yeah, I see all that. That's cool. All I had to do was click on Montana, and the whole code section came right up.
So their website's a great resource for people to see. There are a lot of guys, and this is a national group, but then there's, in Tennessee, there's the Tennessee Blood Trailing Network, TBTN, on Facebook. And it's an active group, I think, of around 6,000 members. And if somebody loses a deer in any county, people are on there. So dog needed. Here's the hunter's name, number. Go get them. And Alabama has a great network. So there's state networks too, and state groups that are all over it, and getting people in touch with trackers to go find their animals. And I think the United Blood Trackers annual survey of its registered members is up over 1,000 animals so far for last season that have been entered into the end of the season poll
that have been recovered that otherwise most likely would not have been recovered, or would have been recovered as just a scavenged carcass, probably.
Correct. So, the Jaeger's oldest track this season was a 20-hour-old track. That was his first one. So I was actually TWRA. We've mentioned them before, but Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We've mentioned them, some of their public hunting access initiatives, but they do a hunt with SCI here every year for wounded veterans. So 25 vets, and it's on a property. It's a public park down near Chattanooga, owned by Volkswagen. It's you can mountain bike in there and hike, but it's not open for hunting, and it's overrun with deer. So they close that whole park off, thousands of acres. They close it off for 3 days of the year for a veterans hunt, and they try to pull as many deer out as they can. So I was one of the guides for all the hunters. All have an individual guide, and game wardens and everything bring us in and out stand locations. And so I was packing for that, and the phone rings. This is October, and there's a young man who said, hey, I found your information on United Blood Trackers. Can you help me find my deer? And I said, sure, tell me more. And part of being a tracker is learning to ask the right questions.
Okay.
What'd you shoot it with? Where'd you shoot it? Describe the blood, all those things. Do you have how big is the property? Do you have permission to go, be on the neighboring? All these kind of factors, and you learn as you do it. The questions to ask, and he indicated that he had shot this buck crossbow. It was around dusk the night before, so around 5 the day before. Hit it was bleeding, ran into the woods and into a wood line. Him and his father tracked it, jumped it from a bed, and lost it. Then it rained really heavy that night, and then they went back the next morning and looked for it again and couldn't find it, and they found me. And I just happened, this is just, got the intervention. I just happened to, they were doing like a cookout meet and greet the night before for these veterans, and I'd reached out to friends at like Leupold and Revision, and they had sent a bunch of stuff for all the guys.
Yeah.
And I was bringing it all down. And I said, man, I'd love to, but I have to be at this event in Knoxville that I'm helping guide. And I was like, well, where are you? And he told me, and it ended up being like 20 miles from, and this is a 2.5 hour drive to get where I have to get. It just happened to be 20 miles from the spot. And I was like, man, this is incredible, but, I'm going to be where you are. Let me see if I can go drop this stuff off and then come help you, then go back in time.
Yeah.
Sure enough, I got down there and it's like 3 o'clock. I dropped the stuff, and 3:30, I'm pulling Jaeger out of the back seat, and we're suiting up, and him and his father are there, and we're like, okay, but tell me the story, and showed me where he hit the deer. He had shot with a crossbow, couldn't find the bolt, but showed me where he thought he ran, and Jaeger just kind of takes off across the field. Shows me some blood in the field. And I'm like, okay, he's on it. Goes into the wood line, and we're going through some pretty thick brush. Sees some spotty blood here or there, even after the rain. And then it gets to where the deer was bedded, and they're like, oh, the deer was over here bedded. And I'm like, well, Jaeger's pulling me really hard over here. So I actually pulled him off the track, and I was like, well, let's go inspect the bed area. And it's one thing you learn is that hunters see stuff, and it's not always really real. And what I mean by that is it can be very confusing late in the dark which way an animal goes. It can also be confusing, particularly in high-density deer areas. If you're tracking and you see a deer run, you don't necessarily know it was even your deer. It could be a different deer. So we go over to where it was bedded, and they tell me the direction it ran. I'm like, well, Jaeger's really disinterested here, and he was really, really over there telling me to go over there. So let's go back over there. And so we go over there, and we follow it it's kind of going down this side slope of this kind of, hill mountain where we are in the plateau. And followed that for a long ways. And I'm like thinking to myself, and this is his first, like, what I would call real track ever. Everything to this point had been stuff that I had shot and pretty much knew where it fell and just got him, or did know where it fell exactly, and just went and got him and let him do it. This was the first like cold call, I'd call it. And so we're going for a few hundred yards, zero sign whatsoever. And I'm pull my phone out to stare at it, pull up the GPS to try to orient a little bit. I can starting to see a house in that backyard. I'm starting to think your neighbors had your deer, but I hadn't seen any sign. And it just so happens that in the act of looking down on my phone, I see a white rock that has 3 drops of blood on it. And I was like, holy smokes, he's still on this friggin' deer. So that was a cool coincidence. And then we continue on a ways, and he kind of loses interest again. And so I'm kind of like, well, let's water him. It's pretty hot. I was like, let's water the dog, because he goes crazy on these things. And let's go back and reset the dog at last known. So we go back about 100 yards, reset him. And I'm like, well, let me look at this quick. And tracking is very much a team effort, right? You learn to read the dog's body language really well. And you can tell by the way he wags his tail and the way he barks, or just the way he is when he's on and off. And you learn that the more you do it. And I go back to the blood drips, and I look at them closely, and I can see the fingers are pointing straight up the side of the face. They're not pointing our downhill at our angle that we were moving. And, it's one thing that this season has taught me is throw stereotypes out as far as what you hear wounded animals do. Oh, they go downhill. They only run downhill. They'll go find them at water. Throw it all out the window. Get a dog.
Old wives' tales.
Old wives' tales. Get a dog. The nose knows. And so I look at him like, well, this deer was not running downhill like you always hear. He was running up the mountain at this point. And sure enough, I set Jaeger back down and kind of let him scan a little area, and then he just takes off straight up. And I'm on my hands and knees going through briars, underbrush, and it opens up into this, like, I gotta say, it's like a trophy briar field. I've never seen briars as dense and as thick. I'm talking like diameter of your thumb, 12 feet in the air, like huge, gnarly. And I'm stuck in stuff, and I'm like, Jaeger's barking, and I'm just trying to figure out, is he hurt? Is he stuck? Like, I'm trying to unstick, and I hear the hunter's father yell out, he found him. And sure enough, that buck 20 yards into that stuff was laying there. 20 hours later, I was like, and they were ecstatic. And that was that's the first video on my YouTube channel, is that track on just Damon Bungard. But
so what is the YouTube channel?
Just my personal one, Damon Bungard.
Yeah, and that's where you've got all your tracking videos.
Yeah, there's 4 of them there. There's that track, then a doe recovery for me, his last buck track of the year, which was almost a mile, and then a wild boar track.
Okay.
So that was like, I got back in the truck and I called Ashley, and I was like, and I called the breeder. I was like, holy crap, this dog just blew my mind. And you see that, and the young hunter, he was 19 years old, and it was a huge buck, gorgeous, big buck, kickers and just gorgeous. And I've never killed a deer that big. And I was thinking to myself, do you know how, distraught I'd be had I known I shot that deer? And not that size always mattered. You get my point.
Right.
Biggest buck of his life, knowing you hit it and you can't find it. That's a terrible feeling. And just recovering it, that made his day, made my day to see Jaeger do that. And it was from then on, I was like, okay, we'll do some more training, but this dog's got it. He's got what it takes. And the rest of the season, it was more of that. It was more lessons. There's funny. The next day, in that veterans hunt, my hunter needed Jaeger. He ended up the last day of the hunt. He was borrowing my muzzle loader with a scope, and there's a doe and a buck coming up behind our ground blind. And I just kind of hit the deck. I pointed at my hunter, and I said, your deer's out there. And they were allowed 2 deer, either 2 doe or a buck in the doe. And I was like, there's a buck following a doe right over my shoulder. Shoot it. So I hit the deck. He aims over me, and he shoots. And I'm kind of peeking out of a little corner of the ground blind. And I see he shoots the doe. I didn't see the buck. Shoots the doe. And she runs 10 yards and hits the deck. And I'm like, oh, no, you shot the doe. So we get out. He's very excited. We get his deer, but he's like, I thought it was the buck. I was like, it's okay. Stuff happens. We still got a whole day to hunt. And I was like, and we got the best buck bait you could think of. If there's a hot doe with a buck already on her and she's laying behind our blind, if another buck comes along, he's gonna be not too long after or two. And sure enough, 2 hours later, here comes another buck. And same thing. I hit the deck. He's over my left shoulder. He's following her trail, just like I said. And he shoots it, and I just didn't like the way that it ran. So I get out of the blind, and we get up to it. We get up, and I finally mark a hit. I mark a little bit of blood. I'm like, look, it's 9 a.m. Jaeger's in the hotel with Ashley. It's gonna start raining around 1 o'clock. Let's just give this deer a little bit and go get Jaeger. And I was like, at best, that deer is laying, right in the woods over there. If not, we might need Jaeger to get him. And the way he ran, he ran flag down and just kind of took off. But I could tell he was hit. He had that kind of funky gait. So I was worried about a leg hit. And so we wait. Officer Pike, the game warden, runs us out and then comes back. He's like, well, I'll go back in with you. I'd like to see this. Because they don't have a lot of the wardens here. In Tennessee, you have to track on lead. You have to call the local regional office to let them know you're tracking an animal in the region. Okay. And you're not supposed to carry a weapon, exception to that being if you have a concealed carry permit. But in this case, the game warden was with us. And the reason they have those laws here is because people will run a dog or had run dogs with, or run deer with dogs and then claim they were tracking, right? So they took, by putting a weapon stipulation in there, that takes that out of it.
Gotcha.
Obviously, this is a very unique case. We're on a very controlled, very unique hunt, and the game warden's with us, so there's no question about what we're doing at this point. So myself, the game warden, and the hunter proceeded, and he was armed, I was armed, not knowing what we'd find. Well, about 100 yards into that track, I found some bone, and that's one of those indicators. If you find bone in the hit side, it's one thing. You could blow some rib out when you hit, or other things. If you find it a little ways in, that often means it's a wound where bone shards are being worked out, and that can often mean a leg hit or something. Okay. As the animal goes, and so it's pretty strong blood for a couple 100 yards. Then the blood goes away, and then Jaeger proceeded on for a few more 100 yards with nothing. And then there was a log across an obvious deer trail with some spots of blood on it, and I knew he was still on it. And then the blood started picking up really thick again. And we're going for a few hundred more yards, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, wow. And the game warden, Officer Pike, and I are both saying, I can't believe this deer's not laying here. We're seeing just so much blood. Yeah. And I was thinking back. A friend of mine in tracking deer in Ontario had a leg hit. And I remember on that track being blown away about how much, red snow there was, and how much blood, and we and how far that deer went. And I'm starting to think, oh man, this might be a leg hit. Well, then the Jaeger starts losing his mind and getting vocal and barking, and I can kind of tell how hot and how on the track he is by how vocal he is.
Oh, okay.
And somewhere in my Instagram or his Instagram, his is at Jaeger Tracks. There's this clip. And he goes nuts, and then I see the buck run. Well, and I'm like, it was a very strong run. I was like, it wasn't a weak-looking animal. And same thing. So Officer Pike and I talk, and we're like, well, just like I said, I have no way of knowing that was his deer. There's so many deer in this place that could very well have been a different deer. The blood at this point is strong, though, so I was like, we kind of have, we have the two options. Anybody that knows they have a wounded animal has that, debate. And it's, do I back out and go get another wait? Or do you push it and keep it bleeding?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I don't know that there's any right or wrong answer, but based on the blood that I was seeing and knowing how hot Jaeger was on it, and knowing that Officer Pike was there, he had his, his sidearm, I had mine. I was like, well, we can go back and get a shotgun, or that's going to be a couple miles out of here. I'm going to come back in, or we just keep going. And Officer Pike, I was like, let's go look at the bed and make our judgment from the wound bed. Well, we go a little ways, and there's no wound bed. We could see this deer was walking and just kept walking. So when I bumped him, he was just probably looking at us or ass into us and just took off.
Yeah.
And there was still blood to follow. So Officer Pike and I debated it, and we're like, okay. I was like, do you want to have your weapon drawn? He's like, well, you're in front. You used yours. Okay. And I was carrying a Kimber, a K6 357 revolver. 50 yards after that, this buck Jaeger's going ballistic, and this deer's running at me. So he's running uphill. Oh. He's running uphill at me. I fired 4 times. Hit him twice. He kind of runs, tumbles, falls. Very like this really like pretty action packed, And so he's on the ground. Eventually, Officer Pike put another 45, and this deer would not die. And so eventually, my hunter shot that deer with a muzzle loader. I shot him with a 357 at least twice, and then Officer Pike shot him once. But we got the deer. And again, point being, in that case, one of the debating points for the game warden was the political atmosphere of that hunt. Was that they didn't want wounded deer being seen by the public. They'd already gotten some pushback for even conducting this hunt on this public park. And so what do you do? So he, his judgment was, we want to do everything we can to get this deer finished and out of here, and not have somebody find a carcass or have somebody see, a 3-legged deer stumbling around weak.
Right.
And those are both valid concerns.
Yep.
So, in the end, though, the veteran was sad he got a buck. It was a really cool buck too. He had like a clubbed antler, and he had like a weevil, some kind of bug had bored a hole through its antler when it was in velvet. So he had like a tunnel through his antler, and a biologist, all the deer there were being then taken to a state biologist, and everything was being recorded, and they do a study of the deer in there because it's such a closed population. But yeah, the biologist told us, what happens at some parasite they get in velvet. But in the end, in that weekend, that was a good example of, those 2 deer would not have been recovered without Jaeger.
Right.
And so that was good. And I'm glad, the game warden was there. He got to see, firsthand, how it goes down. And in that case, I think, even though Jaeger was leashed, it was the barking. Defensive deer will often run from a human, but they'll stand their ground versus something barking at them.
Oh, really? They respond differently.
They do. And I think ultimately having Jaeger there barking is what made that deer stop and want to defend versus just keep going and going and going and going. And that's just my personal perception. But that was that lesson of, do you push or do you keep bleeding? And, now if I'm alone, I'll have that debate probably a little differently after that experience. Another personal track for me was, I was bow hunting, late season, it was rifle season, but I was bow hunting, and shot a doe, and it just made the funkiest sound I've ever heard of an arrow hitting a deer. It was like somebody kicked a hollow watermelon. It was just a weird, and it was a quartering in from behind shot, 30 yards, compound bow, and that just made me nervous. I was like, did I just gut shoot that deer or something? I was like, it just was it was the oddest sound.
Yeah.
And so I get down from my tree and I go over to mark the spot and I find my arrow, and the arrow looks okay, maybe some gut matter, but there's blood on it. But there's very short white fur. And I was like, oh no, I did gut shoot this deer, so I was like, well, I'm just going to leave, it was morning hunt. I'm like, I'm out of here. So I didn't even look for that deer. I just went home, waited 4 hours, got Jaeger, hiked back in. And, there was no blood for, 50 yards. Then blood started, and Jaeger found that deer in 150 yards. I probably would have found that deer.
Yeah.
And the shot was one of those. It was crazy. It was one of those. I still can't figure out where that white fur came from. It was, it was liver, diaphragm, lung. And that thud must have been the diaphragm popping.
Yeah.
But the shot was up in the brown, mid-body on both sides, entry and exit. All I can figure is that the arrow coming out, she kicked it with her front leg, and that razor blade cut white hair. But the shot itself was in brown hair. So that's just one of those things that it was misleading. Had that been a marginal shot, what would I have done? So it was one of those, takes the pressure off. I'm like,
right.
I got Jaeger at home. I got a Jaeger. It's like Crocodile Dundee when he's like, I got a dunk.
Oh, that is so cool.
That was cool. And his last track was for a hunter from New York, which is pretty cool because he had moved down. He was a physical therapist, works at the hospital in Cookeville, and he had heard of tracking dogs from New York, from the Gianninis. And so literally the book on tracking is tracking dogs for finding wounded deer by John Giannini.
How do you spell that?
John and Jeanneney.
Okay.
You can find it on borntotrack.com. That's their website, or Amazon.
Okay.
But it's a great book on training techniques and breeds, pros and cons, because a lot of dogs can be used for big game recovery, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses like anything else. But it talks about, so this hunter lived up there, and he'd never seen one work, but he'd heard of them. He's like, oh wow, a dachshund. I've never I've heard of this only. I've never seen it happen. So he was hunting behind his home on this ridge top, and 30-30. How many deer has been shot by lever action 30-30? It's lots. And he shot it. And he had good blood. I mean, if I had seen the blood he showed me, I'd have thought that deer was laying there. but he tracked it for a couple 100 yards, and then the blood started going away, and there was nothing. And so he did what every hunter should do. He just backed out. He didn't grid search. He didn't, start just wandering and looking at stuff, because that's all those things help throw a dog off. People don't realize when you grid search how much blood you've already walked through and how much scent you spread just by walking around. So it's always good if you do shoot something and back out to get a dog, note where you left the track, and not grid search. If you at all feel like you're going to get a dog, don't grid search, and don't have a party of 6, going out all over looking, because all of those things only make the recovery harder for that dog. Good dogs will work their way to sort it out, but you're not helping the cause. And so he did everything right. He tracked for a couple 100 yards. There was bright red blood. It looked good. Then it went away, and so he just left. He went back to the hit site and marked it with his red hat, his hunter orange hat, and left.
Yeah.
So we showed up. That was at 9 a.m. He got a hold of us, United Blood Trackers. He called me around 3. I was there around 3 o'clock, let's say. Took up the track, and this was where, I'd say Jaeger was like, he had done the first track was pretty amazing, but I was like, maybe he got lucky. Maybe he winded that deer. You start questioning, but obviously it was impressive.
Yeah.
20-hour-old after the range, all those factors. But, this time it was, okay, there's signs clearly going away. And Jaeger, he took some big walkabouts, and dogs will learn. They'll leave a track, and they'll correct themselves, and you kind of learn their loop size. And they like the way they like to loop back to a track. And so I've been learning about how much lead to give Jaeger, because he's still young. He likes to run tracks. He doesn't work them slow, methodically, like older dogs and some dogs will do. He tends to run them because he's kind of down in the he's real excited. Yeah. So it's tough for me, how much restraint versus letting him go. And that's where having that long lead comes in. You can have a 50-foot lead, and if he starts to get away from you, you can step on it or, work it through trees and grab it. Okay. And anyway, he kind of a couple resets, but the hunter and his friend was there, did everything right too. They stayed behind me, marking last blood, putting tape so we can see kind of a direction of travel. When I start to feel like he was on a different deer or something, we had spots to reset. But he went on this one big walkabout, and I had them stay put, and I was like, let's just see where he goes. And it was going down this very rocky mountainside, goes into somebody's backyard, and loops around, comes all the way back, and then just cuts this hard 90 down this slope. And I see one drop of blood, and I was like, wow. He just refound it. And then that went down to a creek where there was one drop of blood, and then that led through some brush to a road where there was a drop of blood, and then it went to a barbed wire fence where you could see the deer had jumped, and there was some hair and meat matter on the fence. But then once it jumped the fence, it entered this huge cleared bit, farm field. There was fields as far as you could see left or right, a couple farmhouses, a couple little pockets of brush and a stream, but for the most part, just cleared country. And he starts doing these, I call it wax on, wax off from a Karate Kid. He starts doing these loops of spiral, and he's kind of slowly working his spiral loops in a direction. And I just tell the other guys, I'm like, hey, go check some of those thickets. Maybe the deer went in one of those little thick pockets, or died behind a hay bale or something. And they're looking, and Jaeger just starts kind of doing these sweeps. And I'm like, well, he's figuring something out. And took him 5-15 minutes, and then just starts heading off on this bead. And we probably went, 600 yards. Nothing. Just grass, just farm grass. Yeah. Short, And I'm like, I don't know if he's on a horse now or if he's on a cow, I have no idea. There was one gap in the fence that he wanted to go through, and I was like, anything coming here would have gone through that gap. So I got on my hands and knees. I'm looking around for any kind of sign, nothing. 100 yards past that is another fence line, with a clearly one of those trophy briar fields again on the other side. It was a farm field that it hadn't been cleared or brush hogged in a long time. And right at that fence, he just shows me this blade of grass, this twig, 2 feet tall, and there's blood smear on 8 inches of it. I'm like, wow. I'm like, you're still on this freaking deer. And then, there was a little more blood, and I thought the deer was weak because it was refusing to jump the barbed wire fence. It was walking along it, and then you could see where it jumped the fence. And I had one of the guys come around so I could hand Jaeger over and not risk him cutting himself up. And 30 yards past that fence, the deer was laying.
Wow.
And that was almost a mile. I went back. I have him on a GPS collar just in case something goes wrong. He breaks loose, something.
Right.
And it helps me go back and look at all the terrain and where the loops or what the deer did, how much backtracking, and that deer, it was about a mile on foot.
Unbelievable. A human would have never been able to.
Never. It would have, if you got lucky and decided to grid search and find that one fence spot at the road, but even
a lot of luck.
It would have taken immense luck to even get to that point. And from that point on, you would have been shot in the dark.
What'd the hunter think?
He was, and that's one of the videos. You'll see his reaction. He's like, we never would have found this deer without Jaeger. He's like, what an incredible track, incredible dog. And so you got to learn to trust the dog. That was a big thing, not giving them enough lead and the team factor of learning to read their body language, when to reset them. And if they reset them a couple of times and they want to go to the same spot, you know what? Deer probably went that way.
Yeah. So Jaeger is some strain of dachshund.
Correct. Wire-haired dachshund.
Okay. What's the most common, or is that the most common form of blood tracking dog?
There's certainly a group in North America of Teckle enthusiasts. The guy who wrote the book is a Teckle breeder. He's one of the few breeders in North America of Teckles. Okay. And, has lineages from Europe. My breeder of Von Mountain Creek. There's one up in Alberta, and one in Quebec that come to mind. But it's only a handful in all of North America. But breeds that come to mind that are also, like, my breeder also breeds Deutsch Strathers, so DDs. Versatile breeds that are good at tracking. Another really good tracking specialist is the Bavarian Mountain Hound.
Don't know that I've ever seen one.
They look like a 40-pound dachshund crossed with a lab, kind of darker head, browner body, short hair. Again, another German mountain hunting recovery specialist, big game recovery specialist. But labs can do it. A lot of people here use curs, blue tick hounds, bloodhounds, obviously, Catahoula's. There's, a lot of breeds that can be trained to do this. Beagles, mutts. I mean, it's a lot of dogs have the instinct. It's how do you train to reinforce it, and Teckle breeders and ones that care a lot about tracking, they're putting lower deer legs into whelping pens, for the puppies right when they're born, so that they
to establish that imprint.
Yeah, and there's a lot of training techniques. It's funny how it's evolved what I pack out now. So, like that doe that I shot that Jaeger recovered, about the parts that I add to my pack out list. I now carry a Nalgene lab jar for collecting blood from the chest cavity. I now remove tracheas and dry them into treats. I collect heart, liver, lung, and if I don't eat the heart, I'll make it into dog treats. So, like, Scott Lasap, the sporting chef, and I recorded in Alabama, and that whole thing was I turned an old heart that I'd lost and found in the freezer and turned it into treats for Jaeger. But I'll collect those part and lower legs. I'll pack out lower legs where you have tarsal gland and hoof. Yeah. And use those as training aids in the off season. So whether it's cutting off a chunk of liver and tying a string through it and just dragging that, a lot of tracks or liver hits, and you don't if you call for the dog, it's usually not an easy track. You know what I mean? If I have friends or I know I shot something and I hear it fall, that's a training track to me. I'm not going to go get that animal because I don't want my scent going to it. I'll just go get Jaeger and let him find it. Yeah. But those are all reinforcing things, and it's good exercise and stimulus for the dog, so it doesn't drive us crazy. But I'll use in the off season, I'll use my RC car and drag a piece of organ or drag a hoof. So I don't leave scent. And then I'll let it age and let him go do it. I'll make sure I put 90-degree bends or double backs. And let him go. Or I'll drag a piece of rabbit hide or a piece of moose hide. And people are using dogs for now. In Quebec, we're covering bear, moose,
Right. That was one of the questions I was going to ask is, are there dogs that specialize in bears or hogs or big game, or is it just once you train them, they kind of know the drill for everything?
I think both. I think that there are some specialists that are, get really good at one or the other. Deer is one of the most common just because, in the East, it's one of the most commonly hunted things. But there's some guys I know out West, elk's their game. And I think, there's a certain amount of elk and deer just don't behave the same, when they're wounded. That was one of the things that, that first buck that, was heading down the hill. And if I had been looking alone, I'd been looking downhill in creek bottoms, but he ran to the top of the mountain. Well, I know why he ran to the top of the mountain is because that's his bedding area. That's his home. That's where he felt safe. So that urge to stay in a buck's home range will often outweigh that tendency to run downhill but an elk, for instance, probably not going to have that same strong home drive. You know what I mean? Like he's probably going to be across the next mountain range if he can get there. He doesn't care to stay in a mile and a half kind of core range when he's hurt. So, and maybe that's a wrong perception, but that's my perception. And I think that there are people that mainly just track deer because that's what they have at their home. But there's also guys that live out west and they have elk at their home, or they have guys hunting bear. And I've heard a lot of bear and dogs can be kind of fickle. Some dogs just know the predator scent of a bear and don't want to play the game.
Okay.
Other dogs are all about it. So I think a lot of that boils down to the dog. And if he has positive or good encounters, I'm sure a dog that jumps a wounded bear that's live and comes at him, probably going to think twice about the next bear track. Yeah.
So a lot of people out west have hounds for running cats.
Sure. And running bear too. Yeah.
Could someone who has lion hounds, would it be a whole nother set of training, or would instinctively those hounds know, hey, this is a wounded deer and let's go find it?
I think it'd take a unique set of training.
Okay.
One, back to the leash thing. Generally, when you're running cats or bear,
right, they're off leash.
Right. So you'd have to train that dog to behave and do what it wants to do on lead, if the state requires it. But then it's just, again, not working as a group, working as a solo dog generally. Some people will track with pairs of dogs. Like 2 on lead, but after that it gets kind of unruly.
Yeah, if they decide to go different directions and they're on a lead.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a different skill set, but again, that John's book goes into good detail on, training techniques and learning to read the dog. I don't really train Jaeger enough. A lot of people are doing training tracks, 1 a week. We're doing maybe 1 a month. And I should probably up that, but and we'll do that now as the season goes into more. His last recovery was a wild boar, again one that I shot. And he showed no problems with it. It was one of those things. I shot it, rolled it over, it squealed, get up, ran off. I waited an hour, and I went and marked the hit site, found blood, and tracked it on my own for about 50 yards, and the blood went away, which is not uncommon for a big mature boar, with their shield to seal up. But I was like, it's dark now. I'm like, I'm not going to track this boar in the dark. It's cold tonight. Nothing's good is going to happen if this boar is still alive. I'm either going to push it or it's going to be defensive. And then I'm not going to run Jaeger alone in the dark on a boar either. I want somebody over my shoulder that and be more ready for something coming at me. So I just went home next morning, have my coffee, have breakfast, get Jaeger, let's go to the woods. And, he, started them at the hit site, and he tracks to where I stopped, and then he just wants to keep going. A couple 100 yards, there's the boar. So
yeah.
And it was like, totally low stress and like no big deal. And boar was fine. The meat's been awesome. And he was all over it. He was into it. He gets bored once he finds it. And he starts looking for something else.
Well, since I've started watching you do this stuff, Damon, so I guess I watch a lot of it on your Instagram page.
Yeah.
You're really good about it. What's your Instagram page?
So my Instagram is at Damon Bungard, but Jaeger's page, where I put all of his just kind of tracking and life stuff, is at Jaeger Tracks. So JAEGER Tracks.
Okay. Well, folks, go follow that because it's fun to just watch that stuff. And I'm putting the viewer in my shoes here by saying this, but I've become so fascinated watching what you do with Jaeger. I think if the hunting audience, the hunting world in general, started doing more research and more investigation of how these blood tracking dogs are such a valuable asset to recovery, we're going to see this big growth in the Jaegers in North America.
Yeah, I've a lot of people have reached out. A lot of industry people have reached out to me. To me, it's been just a whole new rewarding aspect of my hunting life. It's, again, after a while, you've taken a lot of animals. Hunting is still really important to me, but, you start looking for ways to give back, whether that's guiding or mentoring and starting to do these recoveries now and seeing people just how happy they are to have their animal recovered. I mean, it's just rewarding. And not only that, it's like mixing hunting with a game of Clue. It's very
Professor Plum in the library with the lead pipe.
Exactly.
Huh?
I mean, hunting's a game of Clue anyway, right? But you know what I mean. It's a little more active.
Yeah.
It's kind of like calling black bear is one of those things. Like your heart gets pumping. You know that the action's going to happen. Or calling an elk or turkey, but it's a very interactive thing. And having the dog there and reading those clues and working the track, it's addictive.
Yeah.
So not only is it a huge asset and valuable asset in meat recovery, but to me it's just been a fun way to give back and frankly, if I didn't do it with Jaeger, he'd drive me crazy. He needs it just so he doesn't drive me up a wall. I mean,
oh, well, I want to make sure that people go out and learn more about this. So between your Instagram page or Jaeger's Instagram page, and then it's unitedbloodtrackers.org.
unitedbloodtrackers.org.
So I'm going to pivot here a little bit because you folks who may not have listened to you on prior podcasts, you're the brains, the vision at the Orion Coolers part of Jackson Kayak. So now you must, is it because you get bored or you just need more things to do?
I apparently enjoy punishment.
Evidently, because now, and I don't know if Jaeger is part of this, but you guys are making these new dog kennels that are designed specific. I mean, this is not just let's copy somebody. This is an accident. Let's make some, El Cheapo thing that we can sell for $4 at, discount store. So how did you decide you're going to go from kayaks, which is a big part of Jackson's business, the big part, to coolers? We talked about that in the past, but now, how did you leapfrog that to dog kennels?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Now we have Orion kennels, which are new, and Jaeger's been testing prototypes and traveling with me all over the country now for a while. But when I launched Orion, the whole purpose was, and I'd been a premium cooler user for years up to that point, but they were pretty much, it was a cooler. And I wanted it to be a tool for more parts of my life. Whether I was fishing, whether I was overlanding, car camping, hunting, I just wanted my cooler to do more. And so, we launched Orion kind of with its customization factor as kind of, more than a plastic box, right?
Yeah.
It should be a tool in more parts of your life. Sure, it has to keep things cold, but why can't it also be helpful in many, many other ways?
Yeah.
And so that kind of was the same thing with the dog kennels was travel a lot with our dogs. The kennels that I were using were heavy or hard to move, and were pretty much only just kind of a prison for a dog. And I was like, well, it should be gear for your dog. It should be a tool for the human and a tool for the dog. It should keep the dog safe, but why can't it also hold my beer? And not while driving, of course, but I was looking at the way that I was traveling with Jaeger, and I always kind of have like I had a tracking bag, right? So I always have this I had this Filson, thin cloth bag, and in that bag was always his tracking lead. He wears protective goggles from Rec Specs. He had gotten a couple eye scratches, so you'll see the dog in some of those Instagram stuff. You'll see him wearing goggles. That's not to look cool or look funny. He had actually scratched his eyes a couple times. On these tracks, he's going through super dense brush, and kind of throws caution to the wind. At one point, he ran through like a full-on rusty coil or barbed wire, ran straight through it. And I was like, I'm worried about him hurting himself. And after a couple of vet visits and eye scratches, I was like, it's got. And that's when I kind of started using those goggles, and they've been great protective use for him. But anyway, the goggles are in the bag, leashes in the bag, some emergency medical stuff in case he does get a severe injury to stop bleeding and things like that. And food, water, all standard dog stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, it was always here or there, and everything kind of wanted to place. So when I designed the Orion kennel, it's designed with kind of this roll-up window Molly system cover where I can mount all the pouches, and everything's got a place, right? I'm the kind of guy that if everything has a place, the right thing's in that place.
Yeah.
And I don't like fumbling with stuff when I'm looking for stuff. Like if I need something fast, I want to know where it is and get it. And so everything's got a purpose. So, ultimately, making kayaks is really hard. Rotomolding kayaks is not an easy thing to do. And we have really good talent. And our core competency at our factory here in Tennessee is rotomolding, which is rotational, plastic molding. And it's a specialty. So with kayaks, then with coolers, Orion was always envisioned to be more than just a cooler brand. And so with kennels, this is right in our core competency. We can make something that's different and unique. Our door system is very much like a kayak hatch, in that it buckles on and off. So instead of a hinge and a door, it's got 4, 350-pound plastic buckles to secure it. And that was so I could run with it off. I could run left or right open. I can open it up into an awning. When I'm camping, I got my awning on my truck, on my tent, on my truck as an overland awning. He's got an awning for shade, can go in and out. And then it's got a really unique climbing rope system that kind of weaves the perimeter with these anchors, and you can just buckle it in and out of your car with a carabiner and secure the kennel. So if you are in an accident, it's not a projectile in the vehicle. It doesn't bounce around and hit you. The dog stays contained. And very, very easy getting in and out of a car. That was my biggest frustration, was portability of some of the other things on the market. So I wanted something that, again, was more of a tool in my life in more places, in more ways than just being a little prison for a dog, and could make it into cool gear. So that's where Orion Kennels came from. And we have 4 sizes. One's in production now. By the time this airs, the adventure dog line, so AD 1, 2, 3, and 4. And by the time this airs, the 2 and the 3 will be in production. They should be going into production this week and next week. So it's a whole new expansion. It's been cool. We've been getting interest from working dogs, from people who travel with their dogs, people who kayak with their dogs, climbers, hunters, fishermen. I mean, just people doing anything with their dog. And I love doing things outside with my dog. It's rewarding. Like Mike Stewart down at Wild Rose Kennels will be there. I'll be there at his place in Mississippi next week. He's like, even the most hardcore hunting dogs or adventure dogs for 75% of the year when it's not hunting season. And they want to be doing things with you and your bond with them. And so I wanted to make something that was really portable and really functional and useful for people. And this is our first stab at it. So it's been neat.
Wow.
We've been out.
So where will people find out about it? OrionKennels.com.
OrionKennels.com is the new website. It's got its own Facebook feed and Instagram feed. so things are just getting started. It's going to be fun to see where it goes. But yeah, again, Jaeger, all the testings happened, and you'll see there's a little clip in most of the videos of like the door opening from the inside. Like we've been working with like the local PD, the local canine teams, and they're really stoked on the kennels actually for running doorless. So they have this really cool like pop system, they call it. They have these actuators in the doors of their canine cruisers, so that an officer in distress can hit a button on his vest, and the doors open, dog comes to aid. Right?
Oh.
So they're running them doorless. They can, when they close the door, the dog's contained by the door. But then when the door pops open, the dog can come to the officer's aid. But then when they're doing training drills, they use the door that they just plug the door on, and so that versatility for them is all that they're stoked on it. And the lightweight. So yeah, it's going to be cool to see. We've had like avalanche dogs of Utah and like different working dog groups interested because of the portable factor. But then we've had just pet people that dress their dogs up and put them.
That would be at our house. We had 2 working dogs that were a chocolate lab and a black lab. They expired at ages 12 and 14, and now we're on a 16-year-old cockapoo at my house. My wife's dog that runs the joint.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't go anywhere at my house without that cockapoo in the car or the truck or fishing or whatever. People know my wife's dog better than they know her.
Yep.
And that's just, I think that's how we are about our pets these days.
We are.
And maybe we always have been, but I'll be honest. I mean, when my 2 labs passed away, it was a hard time. You treat them like one of the family. They
really are. And yeah, there are people that have working and hunting dogs, and they live in outdoor kennels. They have one purpose in life, and that's what they do. But for the most part, people's hunting dogs are family dogs too. They're part of their life. For us, you've met Tripper, our other dachshund. He hurt his back when he was 2. So he doesn't do any real work. I was going to train him, but he's got separation anxiety issues, and we can't leave him loose in the house, because if we leave, he freaks out and goes to the top of the couch. And as soon as somebody comes in the driveway, he like jumps off that, and he's going to hurt his back. So we have to kennel him. Like if we leave somewhere, he sleeps in the kennel in the bedroom. But if we leave somewhere and we can't bring him, he goes in a kennel in the house for his own safety.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of aspects of kennel life, and certain dogs, are never going to be suited to a plastic kennel. There's certain just dogs that they're not wired to be in kennels, and if you try to put them in a plastic kennel, I don't care what the plastic kennel is, they're going to find their way out. They're going to eat their way out, and they'll hurt themselves, and they need to be in a metal cage if they're going to be kenneled. But for the most part, dogs that are raised as a puppy and trained right, having them in a kennel helps with potty training for the house, and it just makes a lot of aspects of travel safer and easier to have that. Jaeger, like the drive to Wyoming last year, I plug him in there, and it's like turning a battery off. That dog is wired in the house, but if I put him in that kennel, he'll be quiet for, a 20-hour drive. And aside from taking him out to get water and food and pee. So. Yeah.
So are you an engineer by training, Damon?
By education, engineer, yeah. So from Clemson,
okay.
Yeah. Entrepreneurial engineer. Hunter-gatherer, fisherman, dog handler.
You said that loud enough. Was Ashley there to hear you say that?
Probably. She's probably laughing at me somewhere.
Well, I'm excited to see this. I travel so much anymore that my 2 labs passed away. I ended up saying, it's not fair. I'm not going to end up using the dog as much as I would the training. I don't want someone else responsible for training. I've done that one time. I've always trained my own dogs. The last one, I had someone else help with the training, and I'm out of the dog business right now, but so many of my friends have dogs. And if people have watched our content, my buddy Wade down in Arizona, he's got an amazing poodle pointer that we use for Mearns quail hunting. When we go out with friends, I still do a lot of waterfowl hunting. There's an old saying that you don't need a dog if your friend has one.
Yeah.
Kind of like fishing boats. I hate to be that way, but I'm kind of one of those people now.
Yeah.
But I think about how many people are looking for what is that great solution for their dog, for the dog's protection, for everything else.
Yeah, I found, when it came to like looking for Jaeger, a lot of it's you got to really reflect on yourself of what you want a dog for and how you intend to use it. Like you said, though, I enjoy bird hunting, but if I had to pick big game hunting or bird hunting, I'm going to pick game hunting. So how can I tie a dog into that? Well, tracking was a way, but also just the amount I travel. I want a dog that is easily portable for getting out of hotels and out of trucks. Just a small dog, and then kayaks. I mean, kayaks are part of my life, so all of those things you have to look at. Your individual needs, and that kind of drew me to Teckles and back to Jaeger. But bird dogs are awesome. But they're one of the dogs that I feel guilty if I'm not out, running the dog for chukar or for quail or whatever it is. And I just don't. When I do that, I love for my friends to have their dogs, and I love to see them work. But they just weren't for me.
Yeah. As you were talking about Jaeger doing this tracking, my mind is spinning of, now there's a place where me and a dog could get back to doing something together where I wouldn't have this guilt feeling whenever I left and the dog is at home saying, take me with.
Yeah. Oh, and Jaeger does it, man. One of his photos, I just like a cartoon, like a cartoon app or whatever, click the comic. It was this great photo, and I was on that veterans hunt, and I had all my sick whitetail stuff laid on the couch, and he was just laying on it. Like if I have anything hunting out, he's like, even my roller duffel, he lays on it. He's like, you're not going without me, pal. He knows when it's hunting season and the gear is out. He is laying on it, and he's like, He's like, I'm going.
Yeah. So with the kennels, is it strictly an online? Go to orionkennels.com. Is that the only place they're available?
So starting there, and we're getting dealers. We just did our first kind of trade show for the kennels. Some Jackson kayak dealers already have them.
Oh, okay.
But we're adding dealers now. Now that we're entering production.
Yeah.
So there'll be a find a dealer thing there. So it'll be through some specialty dealers and then online.
Okay. And there's 4 different sizes?
4 different sizes right now, yeah.
Are they going to be the cool colors that the Orion coolers are, or are they going to be a...
So, yes and no. So we have... one of the limitations of these particular molds and ovens is that we can't do as many of the bands on as many of the sizes.
Gotcha.
On the smaller sizes, we do like our forest camo. People that know our coolers know our forest camo, and it's olive, black, and tan. That's kind of a trade. It's always our best fishing kayak color. It's always our best cooler color, and as far as most popular. We can do those in the smaller sizes. The bigger sizes are all kind of, it's like a orange granite, which is like orange with black specks, or we call one moss. We call that ember. Moss is olive with black specks, and then we have stone, which some of our cooler guys know the stone color.
Yeah.
Looks like granite. So, yeah, cool colors, different things. It's it's unique. It's different. That's what we try to do. It's unique, different, and good.
Well, as a longtime user of Orion coolers, if the dog kennels match the cooler capabilities, you guys will have those molds and those ovens running overtime.
That's what we hope. We're trying to continue to grow the business and hire people here in Tennessee. So hopefully we're making them happy and a bunch of dogs happy.
And a bunch of dog owners.
Yeah, a bunch of dog owners.
I know you make a lot of cooler owners happy, myself. And you're talking to one of them.
Yeah, good. It's been funny, like how many people who are now into buying like frozen fresh dog food.
No way. What is that?
Like there's like a big kind of movement now, people buying frozen fresh. And how many people are like using the coolers? I've already heard from people using the coolers just to get their dog food transported. I'd never heard of this.
Oh, gosh. Well, this is exciting stuff. We always say you and I are going to line up for a hunt. So now that you have Jaeger, we talked about possibly doing a waterfowl hunt, but I say we got to do some sort of big game hunt. And you got to bring Jaeger. And even if the animal only runs 50 yards and tips over, it'd still be fun to watch.
It'd still be fun to watch, and it'd be a great training tracks are great. I mean, it's a great way to show somebody how to train your dog, what to do, what to collect, how to use that one that, again, if I see that elk, maybe it's an elk, let's say it's an elk, and it gets shot, and we see it go down, 250 yards or more away on the next mountainside, you just don't go to it. And you go get the dog and you let him do it. My first training tracks with Jaeger, antelope, mule deer, whitetail, is all just, okay, I know where it fell. I know it didn't go out of that thicket, or I know it didn't go out of that gully. So let's just go get the dog, or I do know exactly where it's laying and go get the dog. It was all those kind of scenarios. But then this was the year of the game time, of total strangers to all new places. And I think that I don't think anybody ever knows everything about tracking, because I think animals do stuff and are unpredictable. But I can say that the memories that I made this hunting season, and I didn't fill a lot of tags personally this season. I didn't shoot a buck in Tennessee. I didn't shoot I went to Alaska to film on Kodiak. And I was like, man, how cool would it have been to have, Jaeger up here, helping find Sitka blacktail. But that was the only deer that I took. I shot a one doe here, and then I shot that deer. But I forfeited a lot of my own hunting plans. I had days I was going to go hunt, and I got a call. No, let's go track instead. And and it was one of those seasons. That's how things played out. But I wouldn't have changed it. I ended up. End of the season, I ended up going to South Carolina, and I was entering, we've talked about it before, #freezer function. I was getting worried. I was like, I don't know that I have enough meat. And then I went to my grandparents and our old family property in South Carolina, and shot 3 deer in 4 days, and just let Jaeger find every one of them. And it was in the dark and the rain, by the time some recoveries happened, and it was cool for him. Again, all deer I probably would have found, but it was just more training tracks for him, and that was a great way to end the year till that wild boar decided to show itself.
Cool. Well, I see it in your videos, I hear it in your voice, and I see it here as we're sharing this podcast together. You are excited about this. You've been there, done it, seen it. You've hunted the continent, but I would say in the 6 years or whatever you and I have known each other, this probably gets you as excited as anything I've seen us talk about.
Thanks. Yeah. I think it's new. It's like a new aspect to a whole new dimension to my hunting that I never really thought about. You always say, "Oh, I could see myself not hunting anymore and just doing this." I don't know that's ever going to happen, because I always want meat. But if I, it's one of those things that you start to question. If I didn't need meat, what would I do? How much of this would I just do? Because of you're helping people, and it's fun. You never want to have an animal in that situation. You want everything,
but it happens.
Right. It's just a reality. It's life.
Yeah. I think about if you want to call it ethics, whatever, the responsibility is probably what I would call it. The difference, and as you were explaining about that person who shot that buck with the crossbow, that was this fantastic buck, the difference of that person's outlook because the deer was recovered versus the difference in their life with that gut ache of, did the deer make it? Did the coyotes get it? What happened? That recovery made a huge difference in that person's life, and a huge difference in the utilization of that deer.
No doubt. And to your point, it was a 19-year-old hunter. It was a young man.
Yeah.
Think of that had turned him off. Or, so there's no doubt that that probably he's not going to forget that. I know I'm not going to forget that.
It had to make you feel good too.
And sure it does, and I do want to say, we're talking positive, unfortunately there was one episode this season that, it showed me the negative side. And I think, one thing that Jaeger taught me, which has been great, and to all the hunters out there who, there's a lot of skewed impressions from social media. And we live in a day and age where it's big racks all the time, all in your face. Yeah. And a lot of people start questioning, I've said it before, nobody likes to suck.
Yeah.
It's just a human, it's one of those things. Hunting's not a competition.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people, Brinker from David just did a great post on that. And I commented that, Jaeger has really taught me this season about he could care less if it's a doe or a huge buck. He just knows he found that deer, and he's super stoked that he got a deer. And it shows, you look at that, you're like, that animal is pure instinct and joy, and he hunted that animal. Now it's his animal. And some tracking dogs do get crazy possessive, and you have to kind of they will defend that animal from the hunter posing with it or touching it. And you have to. Jaeger's never exhibited that, but some will, because they very much get like, this is my animal. Jaeger will start when you start dragging the deer out. He'll start biting at the haunches, and for some reason he likes to pluck doe belly fur. I don't know what that is, but some of his videos, he doesn't do it to bucks, but for a doe he likes to pluck their belly fur. But I'll say, I saw some very ecstatic hunters. There were one of the worst experiences of my hunting life was a hunter called. I responded, and he just showed total disregard for Jaeger's safety. That was that track when he ran through the barbed wire. There was a lot of scrap metal and different things around, and he lied about having another dog and handler on scene before I got there. Which this is a turn off. But then what really turned me off was that, so in that case, Jaeger tracked it, and we had to call the track at a property line. But Jaeger was like, really, really wanted to go to this road and go to the next property. And he said, no, we can't go over there. So I said, okay. Well, 2 days later, he called and said, hey, the owner of that land saw a buzzard, let me go look, and I found my deer. Jaeger, it was where Jaeger said it was. But then he didn't tag that deer and shot a different deer. Now, I know that happened. And to me, that if you shot that deer, you recovered that deer, that's your tag. Now, right. I don't want to say anybody, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to say anybody did anything wrong, but you get my point, is that, and I think largely he did that, to post it online kind of thing, So to all those guys out there, it's not what it's all about. There's, I think it's back to the ethics of hunting and the impression to the public, and using dogs and why you hunt and what your motivations are. But I try to focus on those positives from the season, which was, again, young hunter, shot the buck of a lifetime, and, thought he lost it, and then now he has it, and it's always going to be on his wall, and all those things. It's good no matter how you want to slice it. And then hunters that are just ecstatic for getting their meat. I think of my, that, again, it wasn't trophy size. It was, I got my meat for the season. I thought I wasn't going to have anything in the freezer. Now I got it. It was, and the peace of mind. The other, all of Jaeger's tracks this year, and he took 10 again, and 8 were recoveries, and then 2 were not. One was that hunter who, a couple days later, told me he found it and where Jaeger said it was. So you could call that a recovery or not. We had to call it. The other one was a hunter who, we tracked it for a while, and eventually I said, I don't think this deer is dead. I think you got to call it. And then 3 weeks later, he called me and said, hey, I got it on game camera, still alive. So he had the peace of mind of hey, I did everything I could. Right. I called in a tracker. Damon came over. We looked. and we made a judgment call. It called the track, and in the end, it was the right call. He proved that deer was still up on his feet. So, all of those, I just got to see all aspects this season, and one of them just made me learn how to quiz people more, and the more better questions to ask, to try to not do anything to jeopardize Jaeger's health, and to really read people's motivations for why they want the dog to come out.
Yeah. Well, if it's any. I'm not even going to say it that way. The fact that I'm so enthused about what I've learned and talking to you over the last year and a half since you've been training Jaeger and following all your stuff, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast, it's going to open their eyes so that we don't have this stigma about blood trailing or blood tracking dogs for big game recovery. I think about it. Why did I have this bias 5 years ago of, and it's a cultural thing. It's
you yourself had one.
Right. I did. I'll admit. I was like, oh, yeah, the guy's just running. Now, to me, this is such an eye-opener of a way that we can recover more animals, because we are there at its basic core. I suspect most listeners are there for tracking the animal, recovering it, and getting that meat in the freezer. Whether it's a doe, whether it's a buck, whether it's a little buck, a big buck, nobody really cares. Once that animal's hit, we want to make sure that we get that meat to our table.
Right.
And a dog like Jaeger and these blood tracking dogs can be such a useful tool. It's so obvious now. I'm thinking to myself, why did I not see it that way for the last 50 years? Why only the last 4 years? So,
well, that's good. I mean, if my experiences and to help gain some help for United Blood Trackers and the work some of those members are doing in the states that still don't allow it, I think North Dakota and Wyoming, it was just this year that both states changed.
Oh, wow.
And there's members, trying to work with state legislatures and a lot of other states. I think some people, right or wrong, we have state legislatures and we have state laws and we have wildlife regulations for reasons. A lot of it is just understanding. So if my experiences and my voice help get some attention to that, I can say that I think it's great. I fully agree that hunting is a huge responsibility to take something's life for your own or to feed your family, whatever. The purpose of that is, but once you pull that trigger, I very much agree with that European mindset of recovering that animal is, you made that decision. It's not, we'll just, go find the next one. It's now the ultimate burden is on you, and not that, we all know that an animal is going to get lost. It
happens.
It happens, and nothing is wasted in nature. Something's going to feed it, and life goes on. But ultimately, once you decide to take that animal, leaving with that animal is on you. That burden of recovery at every means you have available is on you. And why wouldn't we use a tool? I mean, we use dogs as tools from everything from bomb detection to drug detection to law enforcement safety. I mean, fact is, again, the nose knows. I mean, we're never going to be at that level. Why wouldn't you use a tool for the purpose it's designed for?
Yeah. No, I couldn't say it better. Well, Damon, thanks so much. I enjoyed this. I hope you and I and Jaeger get the chance to be out in the woods this fall.
Yeah, I hope so too.
It'd be a ton of fun.
I think it'd be fun to see Jaeger find an elk.
I think it would. But that would put the pressure on me to find one so we could shoot it.
Right. Well, you're probably about the best tool for that job that I can think of.
Oh no, the pressure's on now. Well, folks, I hope that this has helped you understand and opens your eyes to something that I think is going to grow. I think it's going to become more accepted. And I wish nothing but the best for the Jaegers and the United Blood Trackers and people like you, Damon. I trust you enough that when I saw you get this passionate about something, I thought, there's something to this. Damon has been there, done it, seen it. If he's that fired up, I want to pay attention. And that's why when you said, hey, you have any interest of doing a podcast episode on this? I'm like, yeah, when? How soon can you do it? So.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking, and I always hear from a lot of listeners. Anybody can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to, I'll answer when I can.
Yeah. So again, Orion Kennels, and I'm so much in the way of saying Orion Coolers.
Yeah.
OrionKennels.com.
Yeah.
And then Jaeger's Instagram page is what?
At Jaeger Tracks.
At Jaeger Track with a J.
With a J. So Jaeger, Jaeger Tracks. Jaeger's hunter in German, for those that don't know. So everybody who likes Jägermeister, that's where the whole thing is.
Right. That's why there's a deer or a red deer on the logo.
And there's an old German like hunting prayer actually printed around the edge of the label if you read it.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Huh.
So at Jaeger Tracks, and he's Jaeger Tracks, just 2 words on Facebook. Most of the stuff's on Instagram though. And then his videos, the 4 videos, the first young gentleman's buck, my doe for me, that last buck for a mile, and the boar are all on my Damon Bungard YouTube channel.
Cool. Well, Damon, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, very much so. And folks, thanks for listening. This has been a fun episode for me. I'm sure this isn't going to be our last Jaeger episode, Damon. So I hope you're open to me bothering you more.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening.